Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to talk about the 12 houses in astrology, what they mean, and how to use them. So when you look at the picture here of this chart, you can see that it's divided into 12 different segments. Each of those segments is a house. In astrology, the houses represent the different areas of your life, the different people in your life. They're very important, and each section also, each house has so many different meanings that it's really important in order to get the fullest interpretation of a chart to understand the full range of what a certain house could represent. Sometimes placements will actually represent more than one thing from that list of possible topics. Actually, a lot of times they will. So it's really important to have a full, complete idea of what each house represents. And it also does mean that sometimes when you're trying to interpret a chart, you don't always know for sure how something's going to show up. Because there can be so many different topics associated with one house, you might have a good idea based on other things in the chart, but there could be some uncertainty, like, is this going to be about this particular aspect of this house or this particular topic? And it's really helpful to know all the different possibilities. So I'm just going to go through the different houses in order and talk about what they could represent. Um, just really quickly, like what you're looking at when you look at the chart, if you don't know very much about astrology yet, is that you'll see that the different houses are numbered 1 to 12 counterclockwise. This is shown in whole signs. So each house is also one sign. That isn't the case in other house systems, but that's what I'm using here. So it goes in zodiacal order, which means Aries through Pisces, counterclockwise. And it doesn't necessarily start with Aries. It's just that the first house is whatever sign was rising above the horizon at that moment, in that particular place. So if you are looking at the chart, there's the AC labeled in the first house and then the DC labeled in the seventh house. That means ascendant, descendant. So that's an axis that represents the horizon. So all of the area above those points in the chart, between the 2 points on the top half of the chart, would be what was above the horizon at that moment in that place. Everything between those 2 points on the bottom half of the chart would be what was on the other side of the Earth, or not yet up above the horizon, but anyway, not visible, that's for sure. Of course, everything above the horizon wouldn't necessarily be visible. If the sun is out and it's the middle of the day, you really can't see much of anything else. And some of the planets, even in the middle of the night, are so far away you couldn't see them anyway. But this is just what would be possible if you could see them. So the when you look at the chart and you're trying to decide what each house represents, what I like to do is I like to have just like a whole list of keywords in my mind of the different topics. And I just try to run through them and I think about what else I see in the chart, what I know is going on in this particular situation. And it really is helpful to have context. And then I try to work from there. And that is one reason why in a reading it's so helpful to have the back and forth dialogue so that you can get that context and you can narrow things down, because otherwise it can turn into an interpretation that sounds like, well, this could have to do with communication or mobility or siblings or some other thing from a list of third house topics. But if you know what's going on, then you can take an educated guess and you can really help the person by being like, listen, there are other things it could be, but based on what you're telling me, based on what I'm seeing, this seems the most likely. This is maybe where we should focus. So I'm going to start by going through each house. I think actually I might start by talking about how I combine house systems, just to give you a little bit of insight into that. But I basically mostly use whole signs. I just want to throw that out there since we are talking about the houses. And then I will get into the different houses. Okay, can't wait to get started. All right, so here you can see two different charts that actually are the same chart in two different house systems. On the left is whole signs and on the right is Placidus. I started with Placidus and then at some point learned about whole signs, started using it, found it really powerful, and I've just stuck with that for the most part. I do use Placidus also. And I've also found times when looking at both is super helpful. I'm actually really interested in continuing to learn about this and continuing to study how multiple house systems can be used together, how you can get a different perspective on the same thing through using multiple house systems. And I've heard different people have different theories about like when you should use different kinds of house systems, if you should use multiple house systems at all. That's also something that people disagree on. Um, so far, what I have seemed to notice is that in a big picture way, like thinking about like who you are, where you want to go, like what you could be, especially in terms of potential, like whole signs really resonates for me. And sometimes though, I can see Placidus really speaking to smaller stuff, like more like daily stuff, like who you are in the real world. Like, um, I think that both are true, and it's hard to really disentangle that when you see a chart that changes so much from one to the other, because some don't change as much as others. It really depends on where your ascendant is in a sign, how much things are going to change. Really, that really plays a role. Like my own chart, my ascendant is so early in a sign that whether you're looking at whole signs or Placidus, not very much changes. And also, I was born not like super far from the equator. I mean, not on the equator, but like that helps too, um, in terms of the signs in the houses. I mean, the planets in the houses not changing a ton. Um, but yeah, I'm still working it out personally. Sometimes when someone will ask me a question and I look at whole signs and I just don't see it, and I'm like trying to figure it out. And then sometimes I'll look at Placidus and I'll be like, oh my God, look at that. Like the eclipse was in this house in Placidus. Like sometimes moments like that, I'm like, I really need to keep using both because whole signs work so well most of the time. And then every once in a while, Placidus just adds that like extra information for me that just really takes it to the next level. Um, I have also I mean, I think that it can be overwhelming in the beginning to use more than one house system for sure. And I spent so long when I was starting off trying to decide which house system I wanted to learn with. And then once I finally decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to learn with Placidus. And then I ended up changing my mind on the road, and that's fine. And just pick something, basically, is the moral of the story, and stick with it, learn it, get comfortable with it, be able to look at a chart and understand exactly what it's saying. And then if you want to try others down the road, once you're totally comfortable with the first one, that works too. If you have certain techniques that you love that really work better with a certain house system, then pick that to start with. Like annual perfections is so great with whole signs because you can just think about like, okay, I'm in a second house perfection year. So what sign is in my second house and what planet rules that sign? And that would be really complicated if your second house was more than one sign, or you're just trying to think about the cusps and remembering where the cusps of the different houses line up. I definitely would use whole signs for annual perfections. But if you're really big on house cusp angles, then you would need to use a house system that uses that. Like you're not going to get that in whole signs. And yeah, so just, think about what you love to do, or if you don't know what you love to do yet, then just pick one. Find a book that really speaks to you and just use what the book uses, and then you'll be able to stay engaged and stay interested and just take it from there. All right, so I definitely rambled a lot leading up to this, and now I'm finally going to get into the keywords for the houses. I'm just going to go one by one, and I'm not going to spend a super long time. I'm just going to throw out the different ideas I associate with each house and the ones that I have like seen come up, the ones that I personally have experienced as being on point. So for the first house, I think of it as your identity, like your sense of self. Like this is you in the chart. This is your body. This is your personality. This is your sense of safety. It's who you are and how you present yourself. Um, I don't like thinking of it as just a mask. Like in some of the older astrology books, like some of the ones that my grandmother passed down to me, I noticed that they really kept focusing on that, like the ascendant and the rising sign are, or the first house are like this mask that you wear, and it makes it feel superficial. But I don't think it is superficial at all. Like yes, this is something that someone might pick up on about you, like in a superficial sense, but it goes so much deeper than that. Like, yes, you could see someone that has a certain rising sign, a certain first house sign, and you could say, like, wow, this person really has the characteristics of those sign, like right off the bat, meeting them, not knowing that much about them, like the way they talk, the way they look, the way that they present themselves. But it goes so much deeper. Like the first house is your like like the path that you're following, basically. It's like one book, I can't remember what book it was that I read it in, but it said that the rising sign was like what you said yes to when you were born. So it's like you chose that moment was the concept basically. But it's like what guides you basically. So if you are a Gemini rising, like maybe you talk really fast and you come across as super social and chatty and trying to think what else people might say about me, but you maybe love books, like you just like in the last one when I was like can't pick one, just like find your favorite book and pick that house system, like very Gemini rising. But I I also know though that it goes so much deeper than that. Like, yes, people might pick up on that stuff about me when they meet me. But and even like I've seen people say that like the way that you present yourself. So like even with Gemini rising and Gemini being the twins, like I love to wear pigtails, like or pigtail braids. Like it's kind of ridiculous how like obvious it can be sometimes. But it goes deeper in the sense that it's like with Gemini rising, for example, like I want to learn about everything. And but like it's so hard to like really dig deep. Like I want to learn about like this and that and this and that. And I'm like constantly like interested in different things. And like someone might not pick up on that about me right away. I mean, it probably wouldn't take that long, but like the other stuff would be more obvious. Like it goes so much deeper. Like I'm just like so fascinated in the world. And um that sense of just like that scattered energy of like going from like one thing to another, like it can be good, it can be bad, but that to me is like much deeper than just like a mask that I wear. It's like who I am and how I live my life. So that is the first house. All right, and for the second house, the main topics are personal finances, self-esteem, self-worth, what you value, whether that's material things or how you value yourself. If you have somebody with really difficult placements in the second house, it could be about trouble making money, trouble with personal finances, but it could also really be reflecting just that like hard time valuing themselves and like a real lack of self-esteem and self-worth. It can also be about your sense of security, like how stable you feel in the world, like your ability to meet your own needs and values in a bigger picture sense, so that if you had something dramatic happening in the second house, like an eclipse or something, especially on like a personal placement, that could be about shaking up what you value in the world and in your life and in yourself. Um, Definitely personal finances, though, is like a really obvious one that people say first for a reason. Like that definitely comes up a lot. And I have found that between that and self-esteem, I can cover most of the things that will come up for this house, but all the keywords are helpful to keep in mind. The third house is one of those houses that has so many different like seemingly unrelated topics associated with it that it can be a little hard to pin down at times. But I actually really love it because when you do figure out which topic is being manifested in any given placement or transit or whatever, it's usually just so obvious and spot on that it's amazing. So the third house could be associated with neighbors. It could be associated with neighborhoods. In one case where somebody moved in with their neighbor, Uranus was in their third house, and it was just amazing. Um, it is definitely also often about siblings or about other extended family. Like the fourth house, you get your parents, but I definitely have seen the third house being about siblings, about grandparents, about aunts and uncles and cousins. Yeah, so all of that would show up in the third house. It can also be about communication and writing and expressing what you need and what you want and um, expressing yourself as like your way of communicating with the world and your way of being able to get the words out, I guess. And it is also about mobility. I've seen like car stuff come up in the third house. Um, Also, like people's ability to move like in a physical sense in their body could also come up in this way. and also travel, like in a local sense. Yes, it's interesting to think about how the definition of local versus long distance travel has changed so much in recent years compared to when people first started thinking of like what the different houses represented. So I think you could debate like what qualifies as local travel now because it's definitely further than it used to be, that's for sure. But I tend to think of like if it's by car or if it's like a really short flight that doesn't feel like a big deal to you, or if it's like for a very temporary period of time, like all of those could show up in the third house, where the ninth house would be longer distance, more dramatic shift, different culture. You're not necessarily focusing on that with a third house travel. Um, and early education, definitely. I've seen this with like people who teach in elementary schools having like third house placements or um, kids switching schools that showing up in transits in the third house. And then also writing in general. I mean, we talked about communication, but like writers and having third house placements, like you definitely see that. Yeah, so that's the third house. All right, so the big things for the fourth house are the home and the parents. There's others as well, but those are the first two I start with. So the home meaning the actual home that you live in, your sense of home, your the people who live with you at home, and like you could see transits in the fourth house relating to moving or changes in your home or your home life or the people there or how you feel there. Um, Private life in general, that's very tied in with the home, obviously. And that's a big one for the fourth house. And then also the parents and where you come from in general. People disagree about if the fourth house is a particular parent or which parent it would be if it was the mother or the father. And I've seen it work for both. So I would just say the parents in general. And also where you come from in the sense of your roots and your ancestors and like your family traditions and things like that. All of that I would see in the fourth house. Also, I have seen death come up in the fourth house, and I think that this is probably like this is a more ancient signification for the fourth house, and I think because it's the part of the sky that you can't see. It's like the furthest from your ability to be seen. And at the bottom of the chart. And I think that it's almost like death or the underworld down there. Um, but I have seen it. I've seen like in a chart where someone died and you had Jupiter down there in the fourth, and it's like Jupiter is such like a mystical planet too that it was almost like it was kind of a beautiful representation of death, actually, I would say. And I think that the fourth house could also be things that are hidden, like secrets or things that are like buried deep, basically. Like I think things that are hidden is a phrase you could use for the fourth or the 12th or the eighth, in different ways. And like the eighth being like things that are hidden because people don't want to look at them. They're like more taboo or more difficult. And then the fourth being like things that are buried, like deliberately or not, that are like secret in that way. And or like hidden away in the home in the private life. And then the 12th being like things that are hidden as in like set apart, separated, secluded, exiled, like those are all 12th house words that are used. So like different aspects of things being hidden. So the fourth, I think like things that are buried, I guess would be a better way to say it. Yeah, so home, parents, roots, death, and things that are hidden, but like private life also was a big one. So the fifth house can be about creativity, whether that's creativity in an artistic sense, performing and acting sense. It could be about music. It could be about creating children. Definitely, children is a big fifth house topic. It can also be about hobbies and games and things that bring you joy and pleasure. Yeah, I mean, the fifth house is pretty straightforward, mostly positive associations. I have seen gambling associated with the fifth house. But like any house, like you can have the positive or negative placements within it. So even the fifth house could be skewed towards like less positive manifestations of a certain topic. But for the most part, I would say creativity and children. Those are the two big ones. And then all the fun stuff that I mentioned as well. So the sixth house is one that has a bunch of different topics associated with it that aren't even necessarily that closely related to each other. So it's one where it's really important to keep in mind the full range of options available when you're interpreting a chart. So a big one that people jump to right away is health stuff, whether it's like wellness, like taking good care of your body, watching what you eat, exercising, or illness and accidents. You can see all of that in the sixth house. But then also, it can be about um, pets randomly. It could be about, and I've seen that in practice. So it's definitely true. And then also it can be about your work environment. So like the 10th house would be like your career and your call or like your calling. It doesn't even have to be your job, but like your calling and your place in the world. And the sixth house is more like where you work on a daily basis, how you work on a daily basis, who you work with. And that could be in terms of working to make money, but also in terms of like working on those fifth house hobbies. Like if you're a musician and you're like constantly practicing every day and you're spending hours practicing, and maybe that's not like your day job or something, but the level of time and effort that you have to put into practicing that skill would definitely show up as a um, in the sixth house, I would say, fifth and sixth. And also like anything that is a daily habit and routine, I think that would also show up here. And if in like your relationship to having daily routines and your experience of changes in those routines, all of that can be seen here. So it is definitely a house that has like a bunch of different topics that are all important and don't have as much overlap as some of the ones in the third house, I would say. Um, so it's really one where it's helpful to have some context so you can narrow it down a bit. Although most of the time you'll see, like I just recently had a reading where I couldn't decide which direction in the sixth house I should go in my interpretation. And then the more we talked, the more I realized like all of it was coming into play all at once. And yeah, so I mean, trust the astrology, I guess, is the point there. But yeah, so your body in terms of its wellness and illness and your routines and the things that you put work into on a daily basis, I guess to sum it up. Okay, so the seventh house is a pretty easy one. It's about partnerships. It's about marriages and romantic relationships. It's also about business partners and even best friends. Like I've seen, especially like I saw a chart where somebody was living with their best friend, and that person was definitely showing up for them in the seventh house. And anyone that like you have that like really close relationship with. I've also seen it, and it's interesting, but in ancient astrology, they associated the seventh house with open enemies, and then the 12th house with secret enemies. And this definitely also seems to work in practice. So that's an interesting one. And I guess that's the bulk of it. And then also contracts. I mean, if you are signing something important and the seventh house looks good, and that's a really good sign. So yeah, that's pretty easy one. All right, so the eighth house. I think that this one is one that is more complicated to look at than some of the others. Maybe because it has so many associations that don't seem related to each other, but there's a couple ways to look at it. So, first of all, it is really helpful to think of it as the house associated with other people's money. So, you have that second house, eighth house access, and the second house being like your personal finance. And then on the flip side, on the opposite side of the chart, the eighth house being other people's money. And that could be your partner's money. That could be inheritances. That could be debts. It could be taxes. I mean, there's all different manifestations for that. But it can also be, I discussed this a little bit in the fourth house section, things that are kind of hidden away because they're taboo. and that could be occult things. That could be things related to like deep psychology. It could be like the darker sides of psychology, I guess you could say. It could be jealousy. It could be sex. I mean, that's another one that people don't always bring up. Or that people don't always want to talk about, I should say. It's definitely an association that people make with the eighth house a lot. I haven't actually seen that in practice as much, though, to be honest with you. I see it more with the fifth house, but it does seem to be a commonly associated topic for the eighth house. I generally see the money aspect a lot, the occult and psychological aspects, definitely. And also, I like to think of it as like the next step for your relationship after the marriage. So you have the seventh house of marriages, and then you have the eighth house of like things getting real and like merging your lives together, merging your finances. Yes, that's part of it, but also just like everything like moving from that like idealized version of marriage to like, okay, this is what it's like to really live in it. And it also can be about death. It could be about like even just like the death of like yourself as like an individual to an extent when you're like merging your life in a relationship. Like obviously not fully, but like that like you need to change in order to make the relationship work. Like both people do. Like you can't like just be completely on your own thinking of yourself when you have to also think about this other person. So there's like I guess a little bit of a symbolic death there. And it's also about like death in a more literal sense. Like I have seen it in the fourth house and I have seen it in the eighth house, and they both seem to work. So I don't think that you need to pick one or the other. But I've definitely seen like powerful, difficult transits in the eighth house coinciding really closely with like the death of a loved one or something like that. Of course, when I'm doing a reading, I don't jump to that. Obviously, I would not like throw that at somebody as like a possibility coming up. But it's so helpful when you're looking back at something that has already happened and you're trying to process it to see like what was going on and to be like, oh, this really was happening. Like, like this is like so much bigger than just us, I guess. It's I personally have found reassurance in that. All right, so the ninth house is about a bunch of different things, of course, like all of them, but it's about world travel. It's about other cultures and languages. It's about higher education. It is about philosophy and ethics and religion, organized religion especially, and it is about astrology also. I've known several astrologers with like really prominent ninth house placements. Um, it can also be about like the publishing side of writing. So you have like the writing itself in the third house, and then the publishing and the editing in the ninth house. And it can also be about teaching. And I think, I mean, that's the bulk of it. But I guess like what a lot of those boil down to is like your beliefs. And so like travel can like you come in contact with other people's beliefs and other cultures, and with higher education and religion and philosophy and all of those things, it's all like it boils down to like encountering beliefs and thinking about your own beliefs and evaluating those beliefs and how they affect your life. So the 10th house, which is on the opposite side of the axis from the fourth house, is about the public life instead of the private life. And it is about your career. It is about your reputation in the world and your place in the world. It is about what you are driven to achieve and what you are trying to accomplish in your life. And that doesn't necessarily have to be what you do to make money, but like I've seen the 10th house come up in terms of like becoming a parent also. And it can also be about your parents. I have seen the fourth house more personally, but the 10th house can also be about your parents or about a particular parent, especially one who maybe is viewed as like very authoritative. And it can also be about step parents because there's something called derived houses, where if you looked at the seventh house, like if you took the fourth house of parents and you moved it to the first house. And then you looked at what would be the partner of the parent. So you would say, what is the seventh house of the fourth house? And in that case, it would actually be the 10th house. So the partner of the parent or the step parent would be 10th house. You could do that for a lot of things. Like I think that's why the eighth house would be associated with the partner's money because it is the second of the seventh. Um, for another example. So yeah, 10th house is a super important one. I mean, all of the angular houses are the first, the fourth, the seventh, and the 10th. You have yourself as yourself. You have your home and where you come from. You have the people you partner with. And then you also have your place in the world. And those are four very important houses to focus on in a chart. All right, so the 11th house is pretty straightforward. It's mostly about other people. It's about the groups that you're in. It's about your friend groups. Maybe like your best friend might show up in the seventh house of partnerships in a sense, but friends in a bigger picture are going to show up in the 11th house and all the different people that you associate with. And it can be people that you aren't friends with too. It could be like organizations you're a part of. It could be acquaintances. It could be um, humanitarian work or charity work or things that you do outside of work and family life. It could be about any group that you're part of. It could be about teams. And it can also be about hopes and dreams and goals. I mean, on a personal level, yes, but also like the goals and dreams and hopes of the organizations and the groups that you're a part of as well. All right, so the last one, the 12th house, is um, a more difficult house because so many of the associations that people jump to immediately are negative. Um, you'll see people talk about it as a house of exile, escapism, addiction. It could be about chronic illness. It could be about hospitalization, imprisonment, all different things where like, especially like being forced to be separate from others, being forced to be alone. Um, but it could also be about choosing to be alone. It could be about meditation, solitude, and finding peace in that. It could also be about things that are more mysterious or intuitive or spiritual, or it could also be about inspiration and art. So it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It can be about like the things that are more internal for sure. Um, but there are definitely negative associations that are worth keeping in mind because sometimes those really do come up in a very real way. But this is definitely a house where it's important to think about the full range of possibilities from the negative all the way to the positive when looking at it and not just immediately jumping to the negative because um, that could be a temptation with the 12th house, I think, more than some of the others. So I hope that was helpful. I went through all 12 houses. I'm sure I missed a bunch of stuff. I keep thinking of things afterwards with every video I've been making. Like one thing I didn't talk about was planetary joys and how certain planets are said to have their joy in certain houses. Like some are pretty obvious, like Saturn with the 12th house and um, Mars with the sixth. And you can kind of see that with Mars and accidents, for example, or Mars and like the energy to like do your work and get your stuff done. And like the daily actions you take, like that makes sense for the sixth house. And then like Saturn in the 12th would be there can be that sense of like restriction about both Saturn and with the 12th house. So certain planets, it really just is so obvious. Like the moon is said to have its planetary joy in the third house. And maybe that seems less obvious, but actually, one of the ancient significations for the third house is the goddess. And I haven't seen that come up in a chart in a really concrete way yet, but I've been looking. I'm really excited. I can't wait. I'm sure I'm going to see it someday. It's going to be awesome. And it's like my quest now. And then the sun is said to have its joy in the ninth house. And let's see, Venus would have its joy in the fifth house, and Jupiter the 11th, and Mercury the first. And that kind of makes sense because of the dual nature of Mercury and how it's kind of this um, trickster and it's sort of both this and that and nothing and everything. And um, the first house has in whole signs, like part of it is above the horizon and part is below. And that really speaks to that. Nature of Mercury. And yeah, so I just wanted to bring that up because it's pretty cool. And it's just like one more thing you can look at when you're trying to decide, like, how is this planet doing in this chart? And if it's in a house where it finds its joy, that's just like one more point in its favor, you know? So I hope that I covered enough that you have like a good grip on the basic associations for each house and also like what the houses are. And I probably should have done this before I did the solar returns video because I kept talking about houses and then realizing like people might not actually know what the houses have to do with. So I wanted to get this done too. And thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed it.